Hi, welcome to the bathtub. This is the old masturbator. We're getting prepared for Christmas. We're trying to clear off a lot of stuff in the shelves before our Christmas cracker series. A highly anticipated Santa's sweater and hat are coming out. I promise you, you're gonna be just as excited as I am. Good time to remind you all that for free gift giving, we've got the wonderful free membership, lifetime memberships all throughout the universe of the International Bathing Alliance. All you need to do is tell me you want to be in it, or give me the name of someone you want to put in it, and then give me a location. I put you on a map, and I send you this rinky-dink thing on the email. I don't even print it out for you. I send it by email, and you can print it out, and it says it entitles you to read books in bathtubs. So it's very prestigious, and you should do it. We have lots of wonderful members. They're often commenting on those things here, and they comment on our Facebook page, and my personal board, my bathing buddy has become more and more famous since I put him in, which is Boris Johnson. I made him an honorary member. I gave him a gift membership, and I never told him either that he's now a member of the International Bathing Alliance. He's entitled to read great books, even though he won't understand them because he's really an idiot. But other than that, we're gonna move forward. Today we're gonna do 2 episodes, very light episodes of a very heavy book, which is The Recognitions by William Gaddis. Many people have suggested we do this on the show. We've done 2 or 3 or 4 episodes on my favorite Gaddis novel, which is J.R., which I would probably argue is the funniest book ever written, particularly in English. As you can see, I must have liked it because I've read it a fucking million times, and it's literally falling to pieces. But the Recognitions is Gaddis's first novel, published in 1955. It's the more famous of the 2 novels. It's not as good, but it is an amazing piece of prose writing and imaginative writing. And so I'm reading through it now. I did a piece on Gaddis, which I'll post a link to below when we run this. But at the moment, I've read up to about page 450. And I thought I'd just tell you a few things about the Recognitions, a few significant things. Here's the new editions. We talked about this. There's 2 new editions from New York Review of Books. One is The Recognitions, one is J.R. Lovely new copies, fairly easy to hold, and much better looking than a lot of it. I'm not a big fan of sometimes their covers, but I think those are perfectly okay. They look a little serious, and I think Gaddis needs to be recognized that he's actually funny. But other than that, so I'm belching. I'm actually belching that's perfect for, by the way, there's a lot of farting and a lot of belching in Gaddis. A lot of farting and a lot of crapping in almost all of his books. So we talk a little bit about this. The piece I'm going to link you to is basically my simplistic way of approach to Gaddis. And I think it's the only approach to Gaddis, which is you need to throw away all the concordances and all the literary references and all your textbooks about what postmodernism is and all that crap, because it doesn't help you at all. Gaddis would have laughed at that stuff out of the house if he'd seen most of it. When he published these books, particularly the Recognitions, nobody really paid enough attention to recognize the Recognitions was actually just a good novel, a complex novel, and one that really requires good readerly attention. I want to talk a little bit about that. The opening 20 to 50 pages of the Recognitions is very unusual for Gaddis, whereas it actually has sort of expository narrative. And in the opening chapters, it's about a guy who's a Calvinist minister. I forget what the father's name. I want to say Thomas Guyon or whatever. They're the Guyons. He's a minister who goes off with his wife, who's sort of invisible in the book, and I already forgot her name. They go off to Spain. She dies on the boat as a result, basically, of a crook named Sinistera, who shows up later in the book, who pretends he's a doctor because he's running away. And there's a lot of things happening in these open 40, 50 pages. You have to read quite carefully to get this backstory. The wife dies. The husband stays in Spain. He doesn't bring the wife's body back. He leaves her there. He goes home, and he brings an ape home. Some of this stuff just sort of disappears where you almost forget about some of it. He brings this big ape home, which they keep in the barn down the road. And his son, whose name is Wyatt. Yes, Wyatt is a young boy whose mother doesn't come home, and he basically spends the rest of his life in some way or another trying to get back his mother. That's a simplistic way of doing it, but I think that's a fair summation. We're going to have a little sip of our Manhattan in the floral patterned martini glass. So, what's important to do with this book is not read all the theory and all that bullshit. You need to read it chapter by chapter because a lot of characters are going to start coming and going. Gaddis doesn't tell you. One of the things I don't think he's at all like Faulkner, but what reminds me of Faulkner is Gaddis doesn't set things up with Bob Johnson came home and found Betty in bed with the postman. He doesn't tell you what's happening in the opening of a scene. I'm always telling my students to tell us what's going on when the scene starts. He rarely does that. He tends to go into these scenes a little more objectively. He sees the things the characters see. He hears lots of voices. And almost all of the prose in this book are kind of objective descriptions of cities, of weather. And then you don't really see people so much as you hear people talking about other people. So there's a lot of big party scenes in New York with a bunch of pretentious party goers who all go running around just yapping about art and this and that. To give you a quick summary, Wyatt becomes an artist. He wants to paint his mother. I think he's trying to paint his mother's picture at one point, and he fails. He feels it's impossible. He's looking for something beyond the world. The recognitions it's a bit like a Hawthorne term, which is you want to see something beyond this world that's more beautiful. And the world that Gaddis's characters live in, especially in JR, but in the recognitions as well, is basically American shit. It's just people making money, stupid advertising, stupid TV, stupid radio. Everyone on the radio in this book, they're playing classical music and mispronouncing everything, and it's basically the boorish stupidity of Americans is on display constantly. Everybody's imitating everybody else, so it's a world of constant imitations. Many of the jokes are that one person will say something, and then later on, the person who heard them say something will copy it. And there's lots of repetitions. Wyatt goes off. He becomes an artist. He fails. He starts to learn art by forging and copying paintings. And he meets a man named Rectal Brown. Rectal Brown doesn't come in for about 150, 200 pages. But you have to watch out for him. Because Rectal Brown is kind of he's the art dealer for forgers. And then he meets another guy named Basil Valentine, who's sort of a critic, an art critic, who basically knows it's all a big game. And Rectal Brown is just a crook. And he uses Wyatt to produce these fake masterpieces of painters. From the moment Wyatt meets Rectal Brown, his name disappears from the book. You'll often have him come into scenes and people talk about him and they'll mention him, or you'll hear him talking, and he starts to go a little crazy about this time. And he's obsessed with all these kind of theological books he's reading, and he's off on all these tangents and all these things about how to see reality and see the world. And you can get really bogged down in a lot of those scenes. You could, if you wanted, get a great book. It is a great book. Stephen Moore was the great proponent of Gaddis back when nobody could read him. And he wrote this book, A Reader's Guide to William Gaddis's The Recognitions. It has a 30-page summary of the events, chapter by chapter, in the book. It's very simple. It's very direct. I would really recommend not reading that summary until after you've read The Recognitions at least once, because most of what you need to know you can figure out for yourself. You just have to pay attention. And I think, I remember the first couple of times I read it, and even now, when I get into some of these, long theological arguments and fantasies of Wyatt's, you can almost skim through some of those a bit and get onto the characters. He's basically a kid. He's all his human relationships have fallen to shit. He's obsessed with he becomes involved with a couple of women. One's a girl named Esme, another one's called Rose, who just paints eyeballs. It's just eyeballs. And the idea, one of the jokes that keeps constantly running through this, is the recognition to see this world outside of American crap. And there are some long, funny descriptions of what he means by that, just that crap. To see beyond it, you need eyes. And everyone in the book are losing their glasses. There's an eye bank. They want to take their eyeballs. They're getting diseases. They're blind. There's constant jokes on the inability of Americans to see anything. So that's the first half. About halfway through the book, which is where I am now, again, Wyatt's name is completely gone. He goes home to see his father, whose father's pretty crazy. He's Calvinist. The Calvinist theory, to put it very simply, is that you have to have faith in God. You have to believe God is going to make you the elect. You're going to get to go to heaven. But basically, you'll never understand God. You'll never know what he's really thinking because he's too much beyond you. It's a very early American wacko religious belief. But it's perfect for Gaddis, which is, you're supposed to believe in a better world, but you'll never see it. And the occasional recognitions that could come along are interesting when they show up. They're not the same as an epiphany in Joyce, but there's some similarity. The final thing I'll say before we'll do a second piece in the second half of the book when I've read through it again, and because I don't want to give you too much. All I would recommend is you read it like a reader. Get used to a lot of characters. There's a second character named Otto who's important. There's his wife, Wyatt's wife, who he leaves, is important. Rectal Brown and Basil Valentine are important. Then there's lots of subsidiary characters, and you don't need to remember them all, but you need to read about 50 to 100 pages a day. You can't read 20 pages a day because you just forget. You forget all the stuff that's happening. There's so many characters. So try to make sure you have some time. Focus on the actual prose, the scenes, the real sense of clarity in his descriptions. Very objective descriptions, say walking through the city or the weather occurring, and really unusually poetic descriptions. And stick with it as best you can. But halfway through it, he goes home, he sees his grandfather, and both his grandfathers, from his mother's father and the woman who takes care of his father. And that's where I stop now. It's obvious before the kind of big challenges that come to Wyatt when Rectal Brown really tries to take this guy apart. But it's an interesting book. It's a powerful book. There's some very funny passages. It is not the hilarious, hysterical, crazy laugh fest. And this is you'll be laughing. If you're not laughing out loud almost on every page in JR, you're really missing. You really need to stop and start over. There are very funny passages. It's a more tragic book. It's a little more serious, a little more somber, but certainly a book worth reading. Okay? And we'll try to conclude that. I'm not going to be any more, pretty fairly cursory in talking about it. I don't want to do one of those really detailed descriptions of it because I think there's plenty of books that'll do that, particularly about what happens in every chapter and so forth. Okay? Okay, take care. We'll do a second talk on William Gaddis's The Recognitions, available in a new edition from New York Review of Books. I still prefer my old mass market edition, which I bought in the early 70s. But it is, as Stephen Moore showed everybody, and Gaddis was upset, it has hundreds of typos and things that needed to be corrected. And so the new version, with an introduction by Tom McCarthy, is probably the better one to have. But I like this one because it's just easier to hold. You need to live with this book. You can't just read it and then throw it away. You have to live with it and go back to it maybe 10, 20 years after you've read it once. Okay? I think that's true of both of the books. All right. Take care. Happy bathing.